Reading Corner today, I'm welcoming Naylor Ballesteros, who joins us from Limoges in France. He's a picture book creator, and his first book was I'm Going to Eat This Ant. It was published in 2017. Since then, he's gone on to publish further books. I Love You, Stick Insect, The Suitcase, The Lonely Tree, Out of Nowhere, and now The Tiny Reindeer. So we're going to be talking mainly about the tiny reindeer today, but I'm hoping that we'll see connections across Chris's work as well. First of all, a great big welcome, Chris.
Hello.
I was reading your biography that, the publishers send out, and it says that you fell in love with picture books when you were reading them with your children. And I wondered what it was about the form of the picture book that captivated you.
Weirdly, when I look back now, it seems like really obvious, and it's strange that it never occurred to me to be interested in them, because I'd studied illustration and I'd worked in graphic design and even newspaper layouts and things like that. So I was always interested in a little bit of illustration, but not much, for the newspapers and the magazine. And so when I started to buy picture books for my children, it really opened my eyes, the breadth of styles and the things that you could get away with, and often the minimalism of them. And it really was like the perfect combination of typography, illustration, and page layout and graphic design in this really fabulous format. A nice big book is a bit like an album cover. I mean, they don't happen so much more, but you used to get like gatefold album sleeves. And a picture book is more or less that kind of format. So it's a big canvas to work on. And some of the books I was just surprised, because I hadn't exposed myself to picture books since probably I was myself a child. And I just thought, wow, there's all sorts of things you can do. And it really did grab me. I just thought, I want to have a go at this. And so the things that I'd learned over the years, but doing other things, I just tried to apply to making a picture book.
Well, we're here to talk about your picture book today. Perhaps to start, you could just tell us what the Tiny Reindeer is all about.
Well, it's about... big surprise, a tiny reindeer, but he's impossibly tiny. I mean, he's like not even the size of a cat. So he doesn't fit in. There's this big kind of gang. I don't know it's a herd, but they're like a gang of full-sized reindeers, and it's a bit like a football team. They're all ready to go on the big adventure, and he can't find his place at all because he's too small, and he tries to help and blah, blah, blah. So he gets a little bit of a nudge from Santa, and he decides... Well, in fact, he's motivated to find his true home and real happiness by this letter that he finds in the post room up at the North Pole, and he sets off on an adventure to find happiness. Really,
yeah. I did notice actually in reading, all of your books that a recurring theme is to do with things that are either tiny or out of their place. So your Lonely Christmas Tree is all on its own. It's out of place because the other trees have gone. Obviously with I'm Going to Eat This Ant is a tiny little ant. So it does seem to be something of a recurring theme.
I'm not conscious of the element of the size, but I think with hindsight, I look at the themes of not feeling in your place, and I think to myself, that's probably to do with my experience, because in effect, I'm an immigrant. Although by my own choice, I left England in my late 20s, and I moved to France. And it's not an easy thing to do. You do feel a bit isolated and a little bit lost. I didn't realize consciously that was coming out in stories until I think I was talking to someone else about some books, and I thought this is quite a theme. Like Out of Nowhere is also about being separated from a friend and trying to re-find them. And the Suitcase certainly is about that. But with hindsight, yeah, I think that probably to do with the first year or two of leaving your own country that I found quite difficult.
It's interesting how these things seep in different ways into our work. Now, in another interview, I read that you said that a story needs to unfurl as effortlessly as a carpet unrolling.
Yeah.
But I suspect there's a lot of effort that goes into making something seem so effortless.
Yes.
Can you tell us how the Tiny Reindeer came together so that it reads as this effortless story?
It started off I put this book together. Well, it wasn't a book. It was just a sort of a serialized thing that I did for my friends. I just decided one Christmas, but this is going back about 5-6 years. I thought, right, I'll do a really simple story and a page. I'll illustrate really quickly, one page per day, so that the last page is revealed on Christmas Eve. And I did it so that when I posted the first picture, like 12 days before Christmas, so 12 pages, none of the other pages existed. So I had to do them each day. So it started, and then after that, it sort of gathered dust for a while. But I thought, I like this story and I like the character. It looked nice. And so we ended up submitting that to some publishers. And then it needed to be developed a little bit more because it was a little bit too straight. It was because I'd done it so quickly originally, the story was a bit thin on the ground and there wasn't an awful lot of why and how and that kind of thing. So I worked with Sue Buswell, my editor at Anderson, and we tried to thread in the story of the girl and why she needed also this reindeer to arrive, which wasn't in my original version. Neither was there in my original. Santa was in it, but he was also a bit like one of the gang. He didn't take any notice of Tiny Reindeer. So Tiny Reindeer had no friends except a cameo appearance by Rudolph. So we've sort of brought Santa a bit forward, and him and Tiny Reindeer have a little moment together where Santa gives him a clue and gives him a kind of the impetus to do something. And then he turns up again to give him that last bit of help. But it is still quite a linear story. It's quite simple and quite traditional. And I mean, what you say about the rug thing, you're right. It's very difficult to hide all the mechanics, so that it does feel like a natural story that just happened, and you don't see any of the machinations behind it.
Yeah, I love that relationship between Santa. You know, he's a guide. He's not a teacher. He's just gently pushing him towards what he should do. Love that. Also love the letter where you kind of have to read the letter to know what's going to happen.
I would say for the text, that was probably the hardest thing to do because we didn't want it to be too much of a downer. We wanted to suggest that there was some unhappiness and that some loss without it being too explicit. So that was very tricky, actually. And, of course, changing voice because there's no narration. It's the girl, I don't know, she's 5 or 6 years old and she's writing. That was quite tricky, that part.
Yeah, really interesting. Yeah. So I wanted to talk about the character of Tiny Reindeer. You've said a little bit about this lovely thing that you did for your friends' children. The visual character, did you have to develop that, or is he pretty much as he was in...
He didn't change a lot. He was very much this sort of, well, his head's like a finger with a little bit sticking out. It's really simple to draw. And I quite like that because, like, I sent a thing to a school not long ago showing how to draw things. And you can draw Tiny Reindeer in 4 steps and you've got a reindeer on your page. You know, it's really easy to do. And still fairly expressive. You know, it's got a full range of facial expressions and everything, but it's really easy to draw. You know, it's just a box with 4 legs and a neck and a head, and it's done. And he was pretty much like that from the start. He didn't change a lot. Probably spent more time on his pattern, on his blanket. Because they all have blankets. There's a page where there's the herd and they all have blankets on. I was like, oh no, they all have to have different patterns. So I looked up loads of Scandinavian patterns and drew loads of those.
Lovely.
Yeah.
I've been looking at your quick paintings that you post on social media.
Oh, right.
They are absolutely gorgeous.
This is fairly recent because I realised I don't paint enough. And I recently started making myself, every time I'm out, I try to just take a few quick pictures. And then when I get home, and I've started to get into this routine where I spend an hour without caring if it's any good or not, just getting some paint on paper just to acquaint myself more, because I'm not a natural painter. I'm okay at drawing. Painting is something that I find quite difficult. And whenever I'm confronted with a new book, I think, oh no.
Because they are watercolour. You do use watercolour in your pictures as well.
Well, some of the books are, you know, books like the Suitcase and Ant's book and all that, they're fairly straightforward. There's no backgrounds and it's really simplified and minimalist. But Tiny Reindeer was a bit of a leap into the dark. I did at the start of that project thought, wow, I might have bitten off a bit more than I can chew, because I've never painted these sort of big landscapes and interiors and people. And I wanted to paint it. I didn't want it to be digital. And so it was a bit of a struggle. It was a big learning curve. And I don't really want to be in that situation again. So I thought if I could just make myself practice a bit more. And if they look nice, I put them online. There's plenty that look terrible and I don't put them online.
Anyway, it's lovely to see them. I'm glad that you do post them. And so interesting to hear that, because there are lots of differences between this book and other books that you've done. Yeah. And we can talk about that in a moment. But I thought this would be a good time for us to look at some of the spreads and pick up the things that you've been talking about here.
Yeah.
There's a scene where Tiny Reindeer is leaping out of Santa's sleigh. Tell us about this and why you chose this one to talk about.
Well, I liked the atmosphere of it, and I liked, in the original version, the one that was just for my friends years ago, it was a little valley with a few houses dotted along it. It was quite simple. As I said, I did those illustrations really quickly, day by day. Whereas this one, it had to be a little bit more panoramic and bigger, and so it was more of a town, and I wanted it to look like a northern English town. It's not even subconscious. I just thought I want it to look like a West Yorkshire or South Yorkshire town. So I think it looks a bit like that. Maybe just to me. I don't know.
Definitely not. I was actually going to ask you whether nostalgia played into this.
Well, I don't think you can do a Christmas story without having a massive dose of nostalgia. So I just like the spread, and I think it turned out okay. And this, as I was saying before, it was a steep learning curve, and I struggled with this one for quite a while. But once I got that background down and built up the sort of darkness of the sky and the snow on the roofs, I thought, wow, it looks nice. It was a bit of a breakthrough, because it was like, ooh, maybe this is doable. And everything's on paper, but some composition is digital. So like the tiny reindeer there, I did on a separate piece of paper, and I did the sleigh and the reindeers on a separate piece of paper, so that afterwards you just put the layers on in the computer. It means that if you want to change something, you can move things really easily without having to go, oh no, I need to re-illustrate big patches of sky or things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It certainly looks like you gave yourself a challenge with that. It's very detailed, the town at the bottom with it's a stream, is it, running through? It's
sort of a river.
A river.
A little river, and then a sort of town centre, and then a few houses on the other side. And the nice thing was getting it looked all a bit bland, but afterwards I used acrylic to put the white snow on top. It's like, oh man, we're starting to look Christmassy. And then I added the little lights and glowing street lamps, and it's like, ooh, it really took life when that was put on at the end.
So the acrylic is a bit more opaque, is it? And a bit stronger than if you use the watercolour.
Yeah, you can put it on afterwards. All those, like the snowflakes and stuff, are all acrylic because it's opaque, exactly. And you can just blob it on afterwards.
Yeah, brilliant. And it goes over all the layers, so it kind of also pulls the picture
that one,
together.
I think I had to do a tiny cheat because there's some bits where there's some snowflakes in front of the sleigh and in front of tiny reindeer. So I think I added on another layer of just snow as well, just to put in the real. Because the thing about snow is it only looks real if you've got different scales. You need some really big ones that look close to you, and then you need some slightly fainter, smaller ones, so it gives this impression of depth.
Yeah.
And it's really simple, but it really works.
What was the second picture that you wanted to talk about, Chris?
It's the back end paper, which is generally what you use just to... Often it's not even part of the story. It's just what's on the inside of the back cover, and it's usually a spread. Obviously, you've got 2 empty pages to fill. This one, really, it is a real part of the story. There's no words on it, but it's this lovely moment because there's quite a lot of interiors, and Tiny Reindeer arrives at the house, and it's middle of the night, and it's dark. And then the morning comes, and there's this lovely sort of first meeting between the girl and the reindeer. And we decided it needed to open up and be outside and have that nice sort of crisp, cold winter scene. We hadn't really had one of those for a while in the book. A lot of it happens at night. So we had this girl like running with complete joy with this reindeer that she's got. And she's dashing along outside in this, the garden's covered in snow, and there's a little house in the background with a family looking out the door. And again, it was another one. It was a bit of a challenge. Most of the pages were, to be honest, but this one, to get this snow that kind of looks like it's really reflecting the sunlight and the little bit of shading and stuff. And it turned out okay. And probably one of my favorites in the book, that one. I don't know, it's just a nice feeling just to be running around in snow, when you're a kid.
Yeah. It really captures that feeling of Christmas morning that children have, that we perhaps lose a little bit, that excitement. I wanted to pick out a spread to talk about as well.
Right.
And it's Christmas Eve, and the little girl, she's asleep in bed, and Santa has brought tiny reindeer up on the palm of his hand. The little girl's been wishing for this tiny reindeer. And I thought there was so much here in the detail of the drawing. And this is one of the things that I love about picture books, is that they do repay very often a second and a third reading, because you're going to notice more. And this seemed to be a spread where I was going to notice a lot of things if I came back to it a second time or a third time. Tell me a little bit about what you've put into this picture here.
Well, it's funny. It's interesting you're saying about how much it's hard to know how much to put in sometimes. And I sometimes think, oh, really, have I over-egged this? Is there too much going on? Sometimes there can be. And you think, we've got to take things out because you've got to direct people's eyes to the right place. And you don't want too many distractions. And a lot of illustration is about that. And it's the same that I learned doing newspaper page layouts. It's like the hierarchy of a page. People's eyes need to know where to look first and where to look second. And then with the newspaper page, you only look at it once normally. But with a picture book, you can go back afterwards and look at different things. But there has to be a kind of direction. So sometimes you have to know how much to put in and not put in, and I don't know if I always get that right. But anyway, so in this, she's got a bookshelf. I mean, it's nice to show that a children's bedroom is full of books. There's a little slippers, like little animal slippers under the bed. I think they're based on my daughter's. It's like she fell asleep reading a book. There's a book on the floor, and then there's pictures on the wall. I think a lot of illustrators do this, children's pictures. I use my own children's pictures. There's a photograph, which is really the photograph of this girl in the image and her grandfather. But the grandfather in the image is actually my dad, obviously my children's grandfather. So I sneaked that in because he died, I think it would be 2 years before I was working on this. So I thought it would be nice to, because it's a story as well about the girl and her relationship to her grandfather, even though that's not explicit in the book, that's there. That's the reason why she wants this reindeer. So I thought it would be nice to include that photograph.
Yeah. Just picking up on what you said, I mean, you can tell a little bit about her character as well, from the kinds of things she's surrounded with. Yeah,
you do. And to be honest, a lot of it, I mean, I thought about what kind of things, and I looked at my children's bedrooms. I thought, a few years ago, what did they draw? They had a go at drawing all kinds of things, stuff like that.
Teddy bear with a Father Christmas hat on.
Yeah, well, I wanted
clock that's got the time.
That's right. And also, she's fast asleep. But the two things that can kind of see Santa is the teddy bear who's looking at him with a big smile, and the clock. I tried to make him look kind of like, ooh, Santa's here. I don't know if it came across, but I just wanted a little thing that if you looked at the clock face, he looks like he's surprised and looking at Santa.
Yeah. The thing you were saying about not letting the detail get in the way, you want to keep the attention directed on the main focus, and light really helps with that, doesn't it, in this particular?
Yeah, certainly, because there's that big sort of bedside lamp glow in that corner, and then the framing of Santa by the light from the hallway behind him. So straight away you're looking at those two things, and then afterwards you might start glancing around the room and see the other little details. But what's important story-wise there is those three characters and what they're doing.
And it's the first time we see the sleigh, which of course is brightly lit as well.
Yeah, and the fact that it's right next to her.
Yeah.
She's put it there kind of because it's really important to her, because she's hoping something might happen.
It's not the first time that you've written about Christmas. You had your Lonely Christmas Tree book. you've talked about Christmas being a time of nostalgia. Is that what made you do those two books, or is there something else about Christmas and what it means to you?
I don't really know. The thing is, the Christmas book, the Christmas tree book was a similar thing. It was a thing I did for my friends that I shared, because I did it first with the reindeer, tiny reindeer, and my friends really liked it, and my friends' children liked it. So I thought, I'll do it again. I printed a few and sent them to people as Christmas cards, like a 12-page Christmas card, because there's no text in it. Originally, it was a wordless picture story. And so I printed a few and I sent them to, at the time, my editor. It was at Bloomsbury. And she really liked it. She said, shall we make it into a book? So that's how that came about. I don't know if I have a particular affinity with or for Christmas stories. It's just that those two stories I'd done and they were there, and they were both okay stories that worked. But the tree, whereas Tiny Reindeer, the original and the finished published one are quite similar, the tree was really different. It was, as I said, there was no text. It was all in like sepia monotone. It was really low key and quiet. And then the published one came and it had like text added, like a Christmas rhyme, and it was quite a difference between the original and the finished product.
Interesting. One of the things that I have noticed in reading all of your books, together in a short space of time, is how different they are. For instance, The Lonely Tree has a very different visual aesthetic to I'm Going to Eat This Ant. And again, it's very different to The Tiny Reindeer. But you also employ a different kind of verbal storytelling. The Tiny Reindeer is what I would call a kind of classic narrative, and there's quite a lot of text in that story, whereas it's a rhyme for The Lonely Christmas and very pared back, first person sort of direct thought for your Ant and Anteater book. So my question, sorry for the length of this one, is whether it's the story that dictates the approach, whether you like to keep things fresh and exciting for yourself, or whether you're experimenting to find out where you feel most comfortable.
I wish I could say there was a master plan and that I'm moving seamlessly from one technique through to the next, but there's absolutely no plan at all. For a start, there are very different kinds of stories, and that's mostly because I just have to go with the ideas that work best, whatever they may be in the end. I have to have a lot of ideas because, 4 out of 5 are not worth developing. And then 1 out of 5, you think, oh, that's got something. And then it might or might not become a finished story, and then might or might not become a book. So it's so rare to get a good idea that you think works that I have to follow it up no matter what kind of story it is or what kind of mood it might be. I just think, right, there's something in that. I'm going to develop it and see if it works. And I do realize, I'm looking at the books that I've done, as you say, they are really different. And I sometimes think, oh, heck, it would be nice to have like a coherence to, at least visually, a visual coherence. But on the other hand, I think, well, does anyone care really? No one's going to be a completist of my work and go, oh, these are all, they don't sit well together. Like you say, you've got to sort of use what works for a story. And a story like Tiny Reindeer did need a sort of a detailed world with fairly real looking elements in it. That wouldn't have worked for a story about an ant that gets, imagined into sandwiches and
sautéed, all sorts of things.
That suited a quite simple, stylized look to it, which I really enjoyed doing, and that carried through to quite a few books.
The story is the primary thing. That's what I take from that. And do you know, Chris, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today in the Reading Corner.
Are you too, Nikki?
Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure.
In the Reading Corner is presented by Nikki Gamble and produced by Alison Hughes. If you have enjoyed this podcast, please do leave a review for us. To find out about other projects, including an audience with events and the Exploring Children's Literature Summer School, visit www.exploringchildrensliterature.uk. Join us again soon in the Reading Corner on your favourite podcast platform.